All right, let's go live. That's Jack Rowlett live from the UK. I'm Andrew Donaldson. Thank you so much for joining us on Heard Tell. We appreciate you giving us the most precious thing you have, your time, especially on live. Look, we actually scheduled this before everything that happened in the slow UK news cycle today, but let's start with our guest. Jack, been a little while since I got a chance to talk to you, buddy. Good to see you again.
Well, good to see you too. Thank you for having me. It's an honor
Slow
to be
news
here.
day in the UK, yeah? Um,
Absolutely.
It just happened. We don't really do a lot of live reaction stuff. It's just the way the timing worked out. But Prime Minister Keir Starmer just got done doing Monday evening PMQs. I don't know what we call this, but he addressed the House and he stood there and took a whole bunch of questions, took questions for over an hour. Let's set this up for people that don't know what's going on here. This goes from the Mandelson mess. This is Epstein related. This is not like the US version of it where it's just pictures and innuendos and we know he was a bad guy. There's money changing hands. There's a criminal investigation. Whatever else you think of Mandelson, he's caught pretty red-handed with the Epstein stuff and a variety of things. Now, we should be clear, his charges are on the money and influence side of it, not on the... By the way, I've never heard the term pedophilia pronounced so many different ways than I counted 6 different ways, 6 different people pronounced it. He's not explicitly charged on that side of it. It's the money side of it. I think we should be clear on that to be fair here. However, everybody knows who the guy was because he had already been convicted by this point. Keir Starmer appointed him ambassador to the U.S., and that's when the mess started, and that got us to today. How would you summarize this scandal? And really, because this has been going on since, the fall of 2024, December 2024. Boy, you want to talk about a slow motion disaster everybody saw coming and it just keeps avalanching and nobody seems to really be able to stop it. How would you put this in kind of a soundbite for people that haven't kept up with it?
Well, I think it's the biggest scandal in British politics, possibly in the 21st century.
Wow, that big.
I mean, it's absolutely appalling that Starmer appointed this man in the first place. Really, you have to go back 30 years, right? Peter Mandelson was a totemic figure in the kind of New Labour era, so the last time that the Labour Party was out of power. And he was one of the masterminds behind getting Tony Blair into office. One of the kind of big kind of intellectuals and campaigning minds behind the kind of Blair project. And he was then in the cabinet and he was forced to resign over a big scandal about potentially taking cash in exchange for easing the processing of passports. And then a couple of years later, he was brought back into the cabinet as a minister again, and he was once again forced to resign in a scandal. This time about not declaring a loan that he had received, and then he goes away, and nearly 10 years later, Gordon Brown, Tony Blair's successor as Labour Prime Minister, this is in the late 2000s, brings Mandelson back into the cabinet again for a third time. And he makes Mandelson essentially the second most powerful person in the British government. And then Labour lose power in 2010, and we fast forward another 14 years, and Starmer decides that he wants to make this man, who has his fingers in all these sort of Labour pies, ambassador to the US. But in between time, it's emerged that Mandelson was friends with Jeffrey Epstein and maintained that friendship even after Jeffrey Epstein was convicted of the heinous crimes that we're all aware of. And then, of course, across the pond, over in America, the Epstein emails get released. And in them, it shows that Mandelson, who had claimed that he was no longer friends with Jeffrey Epstein once it became clear kind of who Jeffrey Epstein was, and that he was a paedophile, it becomes clear that was nonsense. Mandelson maintained his friendship with him, and even kind of belittled or downplayed the significance of the crimes that Epstein committed. And so, as a result, when these emails came out last September, he was forced to resign. He was sacked by Starmer. And then fast forward to this year, it emerges in a new tranche of emails. And this is where it really becomes, I think, the biggest scandal in British politics in the 21st century, is that Peter Mandelson, when he was the second most powerful figure in the government under Gordon Brown in the late 2010s, was leaking market-sensitive, top-secret information to Jeffrey Epstein that Jeffrey Epstein could then profit from. And we know that from the emails. And then this links to Starmer, because Starmer decided to appoint Peter Mandelson to the job of ambassador without vetting him first. And this is how brings us forward to today, where it's emerged that that Starmer was advised that that Mandelson should, or any candidate for the ambassador role, should go through that vetting process before they are appointed, and that did not happen. Now, the lead civil servant at the Foreign Office basically overruled the vetting process, which Mandelson failed, and allowed Mandelson essentially to take the job. And so number 10, Starmer, is saying that he wasn't told that Peter Mandelson had failed the vetting, and therefore, although it was unfortunate and he regrets appointing Peter Mandelson, it's basically not his fault. And this civil servant, Ollie Robbins, in the Foreign Office, is appearing tomorrow before MPs, and is reported to essentially be preparing to say that he wasn't actually allowed to provide that information to number 10, but that also, because the Prime Minister had already announced that he wanted Peter Mandelson for this role, it was basically a done deal anyway. So that's a kind of positive history of the scandal. I appreciate that was maybe a bit longer than you were anticipating, but
no, it does
go back a long way.
No, you did good on that. But let's start with the piece that I think helps us kind of turn down the noise on this whole thing. Let me phrase it this way. Again, outside observer, so you correct me, because, and one quick note for the American audience, especially if you're not familiar with the parliamentary system. In America, we're used to the president and Congress fighting with each other because that's mutually helpful to both of them, because they can both pretend they're not running the government when they both are, and they fight. Starmer can't do that because the PM is a sitting member of the parliament. So if he's held in contempt of parliament, or whatever the nomenclature is, that's the end of, he's still a member of parliament. He can't just ignore parliament the way Trump ignores our Congress. I think it's very important for us to lay that out ahead of time. Did I say that right? Because one of the things that came up today was like, well, you got told on Tuesday and you didn't say anything about this Wednesday during PMQs, which is, that sounds like a minor detail if you don't understand, but it's like, no, that's a big deal to them, because they're establishing a timeline of what did you know? When did you know it? When did you tell us? He's very much a member of parliament that has to answer to parliament on this. I think that's a key thing for an audience that may not be familiar with the parliamentary system.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. The other key detail, of course, is that in Britain, if you lie to Parliament, that is considered a resigning offence. You know, if you deliberately mislead Parliament, that is taken very seriously.
Man, I wish we had that one.
Yeah. It might help. But of course, the thing is, politicians, you know, how do you prove that someone was lying and that they didn't accidentally mislead Parliament? So that's the kind of issue. But it kind of harks back to, you know, a couple of years ago when we had Boris Johnson kind of misleading Parliament over whether there'd been parties during the COVID lockdowns. It is taken very seriously, and you saw Starmer today in Parliament go to kind of great lengths and kind of say that he didn't deliberately mislead Parliament, and sort of ducking away from any questions that might have resulted in him sort of inadvertently admitting to having misled Parliament.
Yeah, hold that thought, because that came up today. Specifically that example, because that was Keir Starmer on the other side of the dispatch boxes accusing Boris Johnson of that. But we'll get there in a minute. Let's back up, because I think the one thing that cuts through the noise on all of this, and why it's such a glaring offense, not even the politics of it. Look, let's be adults. Cabinet positions and secretary positions for over there, those kind of postings, the prime minister, yeah, he picks them, but a lot of those he's told who to pick. The party has, the apparatus is involved in that. There's a lot of internal politics to that. You get told who to pick for a lot of those things. You do not pick an ambassador of the United States if you're in the UK without the UK running that through whoever the admin in the United States is. That conversation happened. Let's be adults. My question is, Keir Starmer, trained lawyer, who has a reputation for being anal attentive on details and being obsessive over avoiding pratfalls and controversies to the point that he's accused of not having a personality. That is his personality, is that he doesn't have a personality. He's a bureaucrat and a lawyer, right? And then all of a sudden on this one thing, on the most important diplomatic posting in the UK outside the Home Secretary, the ambassador to the US, at least on paper, all of a sudden everything we know about the man's character went out the window on this one thing. That just doesn't compute for anybody, whether you're for him, against him, or indifferent. It just doesn't make any sense. Then you put in all the Epstein stuff, And people rightly have a whole lot of mess here. And I think we got to start there and you said it yourself, Keir Starmer basically admitted it today in his apology. And then all the MPs brought it up in attacking him on it. Why did he decide that Mandelson was so important that he was just going to pick him no matter what? I think that's the core question I'd like to get to. Even before you get to the Epstein stuff, I was like, was that he wanted him so badly, or he was told to have him so badly, or somebody else told them to have him so badly? I think that's the key piece we may never know. But I think that's the heart of the scandal right there, is like, why did everything change for this one guy that was clearly compromised? And now that's led us to here, because everything else then makes sense of like, oh, well, we can't discuss all because it's not just Epstein. He has Russia and Chinese business ties that I think that's what they're hinting at when they're saying we can't talk about some of this publicly. It's national security. I'm guessing it's probably something to do with some of those ties. There's the Epstein investigation itself. Remember, there's active Epstein investigations in the UK itself, not just the high profile ones like Andrew formerly of the royal family, and now Keir Starmer himself and Mandelson. There's other active. All that is part of it, but all that falls into place. But we don't know, why was it him that was so important that they put him in this role and threw all the rules out the window for him?
Yeah, I think, of course, the backdrop to this is that Keir Starmer is a pretty inexplicable prime minister. Like, he repeatedly makes decisions that don't seem to make sense to anybody, even his own supporters, right? So that's kind of the backdrop. But I think there's two strands to this, right? The first is, Peter Mandelson is a figure with, understandably, given his history, lots of contacts within the Labour Party. And one of his key contacts was this guy called Morgan McSweeney, who I'm sure you've not heard of in America, but in Britain,
Starmer's chief of staff or whatever. You don't call it chief of staff. What do you call it?
Well, no, we do now. We do now. Okay. No, we do. This is a relatively recent thing. In the last 15 years, we started to call it that.
We win again.
But yes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know you follow it, so you're aware, but yeah. I'm sure most of your audience probably haven't heard of
I googled it. I cheated, but go ahead.
Right. But yeah, he was kind of Peter Mandelson's protege, in a sense, and he Morgan McSweeney, this is kind of masterminded Starmer's rise to power, did his leadership campaign back in 2020, ran the general election campaign, and then became his chief of staff. He's now incidentally resigned a couple of months ago over the whole Mandelson saga. But I think that's probably part of it. We may never know, but I suspect Morgan McSweeney would have had a lot of influence on the decision to appoint Peter Mandelson ambassador. And I think particularly when you have someone like Starmer, who, as you were sort of saying before, doesn't really have much of a personality or much of a presence, the people around him kind of build their own kind of presence and perhaps push it onto him. So I think that's one strand. I suspect the other strand is actually maybe, and maybe this is a bit controversial, but maybe the Epstein stuff sort of helped Mandelson's candidacy rather for the ambassadorship, because back in January or late 2024, when we were deciding on an ambassador, I think it's hard to overstate the kind of sense of crisis that Britain and Europe were feeling about the fact that Trump was returning to the White House. We were panicking really intensely about that. And I think maybe there was a sense that if you put in this kind of slightly grubby but clearly politically talented figure and make him ambassador to the US, maybe he will be able to woo Trump, because he's sort of similar to Trump in kind of having that kind of underlying corruption, that connection to Epstein. I do wonder if that factored into it.
What does that say about both of our countries' politics right now? It's like, oh, we have to send somebody that speaks the same corruption language and has the same money streams as the guy that's in charge. That's who we got to send as an ambassador. That's pretty damning on both our systems of government and our societies that tolerate them right now. Yeah. Because I'm just sitting there listening to you, and I know you're 100% right, because one of my core principles is not ideology. It's follow the money and the power structure, and then that gets you pretty close to the truth, and then you can start figuring the rest of it out. I think you're right, because nothing else about this makes any sense. Is the powers that be wanted this guy in charge. He put one of his guys close enough to the PM to get the posting. We know how those things work. I mean, and there's nothing in a vacuum, nothing wrong with that. That's how that always works. The chief of staff is the gatekeeper. They get to pick those things. But then when you know that there's corruption involved, and there's foreign influence money involved, and there's foreign business ties, The problem now is if you're Keir Starmer in the Labour government, if that guy is that entwined into the government over multiple premierships going back and that entwined in the party, you're going to have a hard time for anybody in the party, disavowing it. And I think that's where they're at with this.
Yeah, I mean, it was always going to end in tears. It was. I think it was pretty clear to anyone with half a brain that that it was not going to be worth that Mandelson's kind of political abilities were not going to be worth the potential price that you always pay, because this guy has had to resign repeatedly. Like it always ends in scandal when you appoint Peter Mandelson to a role. So it was a really silly decision to make. And also, I think let's not forget the morality of it as well, because I think if we think back to Boris Johnson, ultimately what forced Boris Johnson from office was the fact that he knowingly appointed a sex pest to a position of power. What Keir Starmer did is knowingly, or he should have known, appointing Peter Mandelson, a friend and supporter of perhaps the world's most prolific paedophile, to a position of power and responsibility. And I think that is unforgivable. It is a stain on Keir Starmer's character, which can never be cleaned out, in my view.
There's a saying in America where it comes to lawyers, and Keir Starmer is a lawyer. He was a prosecutor for the beginning part of his political career. That's his background. When a lawyer is pounding process, that means he's losing, because otherwise he'd be pounding facts. If you're winning, you pound the facts. If you're losing, you pound process. I listened to his entire opening statement and most of the question time today, which, by the way, to his credit, he stood there and answered them all. A lot of it was, well, I'll look it up for you later by the time we got into it, but he was there. He did a lot of process today, brother. And I just kept popping in my head, like, when you're in the process and he's throwing the chief of staff under the bus and he's throwing the political operatives under the bus and he's talking about, well, I didn't know. Boy, when you're pounding process to that, this was Keir Starmer as shook as I've ever seen him. He wasn't disheveled, but like just getting up and down from the dispatch box. I've watched enough of these over the last couple of years. We talked about Boris Johnson. Man, that dude leaped to the microphone when Boris sat down. It's almost like he took a minute to stand up and watch just his overall demeanor today. We were joking on, I think it's Thursday or Friday, we were talking about doing this, and I was like, is he going to make it to Monday before we do this? And you're like, no, he's going to make it to Monday. If tomorrow goes like today goes, and you've got TV full of backbenchers now, and there's the old joke. And I remember the first time I did Times Radio, somebody told me that we were in the green room just chatting, and he goes, yeah, as an American, let me give you a piece of advice. When the backbenchers are on TV more than anybody else, you're not in a problem, you're in a crisis. There's a lot of backbenchers on TV today. If tomorrow goes as bad as today goes, do we have to recalibrate our expectations? And I know the local elections are coming, and I know there's not a clear-cut successor, and that's kind of saving him right now. I don't think you can do another day tomorrow like today went, can you?
Well, I mean, people have been kind of saying that for 6 months, really. It's interesting you mentioned the backbenchers being on TV. They were on TV today, and they were not in the Commons. If you were watching the Commons,
half empty. Today, I was shocked by that. I was going to actually ask you about that, and a lot of them streamed out during the process. So by the time he actually stopped taking questions, it was maybe a third full, generously.
Yeah. I mean, the huge gaps on benches, and that's a calculated thing. Like you have the leader of your party essentially fighting for his political life to choose not to turn up. You're sending quite a significant statement there. I think really it's been kind of obvious that Starmer wasn't going to make it to the next election for like quite a while, since last autumn, really. But it's unclear, and I think it's still unclear exactly when the point will come where Labour MPs can't bear any more of it. And the issue really is these other contenders, the kind of big players who might want to oust Starmer and replace him. You have Angela Rayner, who was forced to resign as Deputy Prime Minister last year over an investigation into her tax affairs. Now, that investigation is still ongoing. So she doesn't want the leadership contest to happen now because she needs that investigation to conclude. You have Wes Streeting, the health secretary, who is kind of on the sort of right of the Labour Party. He's seen as kind of associated with the kind of Mandelson wing of the Labour Party, and therefore he's tainted by the Mandelson saga too. And there really aren't many other kind of big players. It's quite a weak cabinet. So those two who are kind of really the contenders to replace Starmer, neither of them has any incentive to want a leadership contest now. Um, and the other thing is, in the Labour Party, you have to actively challenge the incumbent leader. So whereas in the Conservatives, and they did this repeatedly over their kind of final 5-6 years in office, you have a vote of no confidence is triggered. There's a secret ballot, and if they lose that vote of no confidence, they are ousted, and they can't stand in the subsequent contest. Within the Labour Party, you need, I think, it's 20% of Labour MPs to come forward and say that they have no confidence in the leader, and then that triggers a leadership contest. But the incumbent, in this case Keir Starmer, can still stand. So it would require someone like Wes Streeting or Angela Rayner to come out and actually stab Starmer in the back. And politicians don't tend to like doing that. No one wants to be seen to wield the knife, so to speak.
Until it's, oh, we're wielding the knife for the good of everybody else, then it's socially acceptable. So when's that point going to be? Because again, there's other factors involved. You just mentioned nobody wants to follow him. You want to follow the person that follows him, right? You have the local elections coming, which look like they're not going to be particularly good for Labor. I doubt this helped that very much. You have the whole reform issue right now that's splitting up everything else. What would you think the timeline here is? Because if we're in the when, not if stage, which looks like we're pretty solidly in that, there's going to be mounting pressure to condense that timeline. But there's also some infrastructure things like you just mentioned. What do you think of a reasonable timeline that gives Starmer a little bit of time and gives the party a little bit of time here?
I suspect there's kind of a couple of pressure points. So you mentioned what might happen tomorrow. When Ollie Robbins goes before MPs and answers their questions, we don't know what's going to come out. It could be that there's a piece of information we don't know at the moment that is going to come out and destroy him. Because if it becomes clear that if it becomes irrefutable that Starmer knowingly appointed Mandelson to this position despite all the issues around him, and the vetting failure, at that point his position would be untenable. Equally, you have the local elections in a few weeks. There's been so much talk about them being really bad for the Labour Party that it's kind of priced in now. So unless those local elections go much worse or even worse rather, than we're currently expecting them to go, I suspect he probably survives that too. I think really ironically, if the state of the country improves, if the state of the economy looks to be slightly on the up, I would say that makes a leadership challenge more likely. Because the other big factor is that we've obviously got the war in the Middle East going on at the moment. Inflation is rising. There's a strong possibility that the UK economy goes into recession. Actually, if you're going to challenge Starmer, you want to be challenging him when that has bottomed out and things are improving again, which may well be not until next year.
Yeah, there'd been talk that Starmer had actually maybe got it. In America, we call it the dead cat bounce, where it's like it just can't get any worse. So his numbers have come up a little bit just because it couldn't get any possibly worse. There'd been some talk before this really exploded over the last, let's say the last 3-4 weeks when the report came out. There'd been some talk of a little bit of a dead cat bounce where at least it looked like things had maybe stabilized for the moment. Is this going to start another cycle of derision? How's this going to play? Because I don't think anybody's going to say that this went well. It went worse than people thought. I'm just scanning through the British stuff. The Times, Sky, you pick who you want to follow. LBC, who across the spectrum, people are like that did not go well. Is it going to have any effect? Because again, the bar is on the floor for Labor in this election. And the public opinion, there's not a lot they can do because of the structural stuff we just talked to. What do we watch for the next couple of days, especially after tomorrow, if this testimony gets as ugly as we think it might get?
Well, I think we'd have to watch for the actions of the people of the other members of cabinet, really. it was interesting. Douglas Alexander, who's the Scottish secretary, was saying, I think it was yesterday, it may even have been this morning. Things are moving so quickly at the moment, but he was saying on TV that that he thought Starmer would stay Labour leader for the foreseeable future. And that type of softening of the language suggests that that maybe there are kind of figures in the cabinet who are sort of thinking about the future beyond Starmer. Um, I just can't see it changing though, because I just don't think there's an incentive for anybody to really oust him, unless things become so bad. It becomes so obvious that he knowingly made an enormous mistake, that his position becomes untenable. But really, if you're a Labour MP, Labour are currently polling about 16-17% in the polls. In a couple of weeks, they are going to lose thousands of seats at the local elections. If you're facing that news and you're not angling to oust Keir Starmer, like, how bad do things have to get in order for you to decide that you do want him out? Like, I sort of think it's hard to imagine the situation for the Labour Party getting worse than it is at the moment. And historically, Labour are just really, really bad at getting rid of unsuccessful and unpopular leaders.
And then the conspiracy theorists will go, well, of course they want to hang that massive L that's coming on Keir Starmer before he goes out the door, which there's probably truth to that as well. Let me bring it up to you this way, because I was talking to a friend in the UK, and the first response I got from them, truncated to my question, was basically like, "Now this is just a microcosm of the last couple of years. It's all bad. There's no good answer, and we're all stuck with it." There's really been that kind of overbearing thing in British politics and remember, Keir Starmer was supposed to be the stabilizing PM, right? That's how he got the job, and it's gotten even worse. This feels like the microcosm of a lot of other things, where there's a malaise to the politics in the UK right now. Even the reform stuff, a lot of people are like, well, we got a lot of questions about them. It's just kind of an inevitable thing now, and maybe not the excitement people thought it was maybe a couple of years ago. You talk about the Iran war. There's been I'm just going to use the word, there's been a little bit of embarrassment in some UK circles, especially British circles, of not just what are we doing, but like, there's not a lot we can do right now because of military issues and diplomatic issues. There's always the housing crisis. There's always the economy. There's the brain drain with young people, which we've covered with you on this program multiple times, of that 20 to 30-year-old cohort that can't find anywhere to live and can't find anywhere to work. They ain't going to hang around. They're going to go somewhere else, and they are. This does kind of feel like yet another level microcosm of the overall British politics, which has been really, really negative and really, really frustrating to a lot of the people in the UK the last few years.
Well, yeah, exactly. You talk about a couple of years ago, Starmer coming in, pledging to be this stabilizing presence, and actually things have gotten a bit worse, but really things are the same. We have the same problems. Housing, energy. They have made things a bit worse, but really, I think the problem that Labour have had is that before they came into government, they sat around thinking, oh, the problem with Britain is that the Tories are terrible. They're really bad at their job. They're incompetent. They're useless. If we just come in, we're good people. We think about things. If we come in, everything's going to be fine because we're serious people. And they've come in to government, and they found that, yes, maybe the Tories were rubbish and incompetent, but also the British state is totally dysfunctional and doesn't work, and is both overburdened with responsibility and underpowered to deal with the problems that the country faces. And then you have a leader in Keir Starmer who is fundamentally unwilling to talk about trade-offs, and that really is what politics is about. It is about what trade-offs you're willing to accept. You can't please everybody all of the time. Keir Starmer is unwilling to pick the people that he wants to please. Which really, you'd think, the people that he would want to please would be Labour voters, which are primarily younger people in their kind of 20s, 30s, 40s, predominantly, or more likely to be renters, kind of younger graduates. Labour has done nothing for these people. They've killed the rental market with rent controls. They've made a kind of brief foray into dealing with the enormous amount of money Britain lavishes on wealthy pensioners, and then rode back on it after there was a big furore from people who don't vote Labour. Um, to govern is to choose, as is kind of an aphorism about politics. But Keir Starmer doesn't make choices about what his priorities are, what the trade-offs he wants to make are, and I think really that's kind of what the Tories did in office too.
Does anybody dare utter the word managed decline? And I'm not
Well,
picking on y'all because I'm an Appalachian American. This is something I'm actively struggling with in my home state of West Virginia. Of we got areas that are growing, we got areas that are dying. How do you manage decline and get politicians that are elected by the people that aren't struggling to manage the decline of the people that are struggling? This is universal. So I'm not picking on you, and I promise I'm not jumping on the bandwagon of UK decline and the fall of empire. Math. Y'all ain't got enough people to pay for what you're trying to do, and you don't have leaders that want to have the conversation. I've got that problem at home too. So again, not picking on you, but that's what we're dancing around here, right? Like I know the Epstein scandal and the Mandelson scandal. I get all that. That's one little side quest on it. When you're talking about structural problems in the UK, though, and you're saying this government cannot govern because the structures aren't there to govern the way people want it to be governed, that's what we're really discussing, right? Is how do we manage decline to try to get future growth down the road? But you got to sell that to people that are living in a political moment of, I don't want to lose my power right now that I've got. That's a universal question in all human history. You and me aren't going to solve that in this, hour that we're discussing. But that's what we're dancing around, isn't it?
Well, to be honest, I think the problem is that Britain has got itself into the mentality of managed decline, and that life and the economy are essentially a zero-sum game because we have chosen to arbitrarily limit economic growth. And if your economy isn't growing, then naturally, if you want your life to be better, then somebody else's life has to be worse if you're not growing the pie. I think the thing about Britain is that the problems that we are facing are relatively simple, which are that the state is too centralized compared to other developed nations. We're basically the most centralized developed nation in the world. So you need more devolution. You need the local mayors, local assemblies to have more powers over, for example, raising taxes or indeed cutting taxes, but fiscal powers. You need to make it much easier to build housing. And we need to solve the problem of massively expensive energy, which is a consequence of the way in which we've decided to handle the transition to net zero. And the shortage of supply, the rules that have made it really hard to build energy capacity. Now, those problems are relatively simple to solve. Like other countries have solved those problems. There are kind of off the shelf solutions there. It just takes the political will to solve them. But if you did solve those things, if you did have a quality politician who was prepared to make the trade-offs and take the flak and push those changes through, you would actually see pretty substantial growth pretty quickly. Britain could grow like 3% a year easily if you made those changes, because Britain has so much else going for it. Whether it's language, whether it's scientific research, whether it's financial services, whatever it is. Britain has lots of other more complex things that are, it's pretty difficult to build like a successful financial services industry. Britain already has one.
Yes, they do.
Like it's these relatively simple problems that we need to solve to kind of unleash Britain's potential, to coin a phrase. So I think really so much of it is about the quality of the politicians. It's not that the solutions don't exist, and decline is a choice.
Struggling with weight that doesn't respond to traditional dieting? Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet is a clinically developed nutrition program designed to promote fat loss while protecting lean body mass. Developed at USC's Longevity Institute, it assists the body in entering a fasting-like state that helps reset metabolism, target visceral fat, and supports healthy metabolic markers. In just 5 days, Prolon offers a structured, science-backed approach to weight loss without extreme restriction or guesswork. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/begin.
Yeah, and let me ask you it this way, because brain drain is a problem. You have all this money going through England, especially London, especially the markets. It's more of a matter of how does some of it stay in England? And that's, again, another universal problem. you have plenty of energy options. You got the North Sea sitting right there. You have other energy options, but then you get into geopolitics. Like, well, cheapest natural gas and oil on the market's Russian, but that's got a lot of problems with it. Europe's dealing with all that. Then you got the American piece of it. Well, we got an ocean between us, but we can do business on certain things, but we're not being a real reliable partner. I'll give you a chance to beat up on us in a minute. I know we're beating up on the UK right now. You can beat up on us in just a second. Do you start with the younger generation? And this is something that you and me have discussed before, though, is like the UK is having a real problem building a young working and managerial class right now. And that's going to be an even bigger problem down the road if they don't kind of solve that problem. So the UK university system, which was long the envy of the entire world, if you don't have people going in, starting businesses, getting into government, whatever the case may be in those 20s and 30s, and then having financial success, that's not a recipe for long-term success. Do we see any kind of government plans or schemes to deal with that piece of it and getting those people involved, not just on a political level, but on the financial level and the business level? What are you going to do with that? And then you deal with the gap of college education, non-college education. How do those people have jobs? That seems to be something that's kind of getting lost in some of the other conversations. You and me have it because, you know, you're younger than me, but we're a little closer to that age, and I've got kids that age. Does that need to be discussed more?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does, and actually, you know, if you do want to start a business, you know, things are getting harder. I mean, you have all those kind of existing problems, you know, energy, property, etc. If those things are expensive, it's more difficult to start a business. But you also have, you know, for example, we've brought in loads of new labor relations regulations, new workers' rights, which make it much harder, or really disincentivize companies from hiring people, disincentivize you from starting a company, and disincentivize you from creating jobs because those jobs are taxed. So yeah, I think we do need to do something about that. I think also it's underappreciated that. So yes, Britain has massively expanded the number of university places over the last 30 or so years, and roughly half of all young people go to university now, and graduate salaries relative to the rest of the economy have fallen really substantially. And people often say that this is because there's a kind of elite oversupply. You're pushing too many people to go to university, and therefore you have too many people with those kind of university level skills, and therefore naturally, because there's such a large supply of those skills, it pushes down the wages for those roles. But actually, if you look at other countries that have seen similar expansions in the university educated population, they've actually seen graduate salaries continue to rise relative to the rest of the population. So I think this comes back to the relatively simple problems that Britain is suffering from. It suggests that actually it is those issues that are resulting in not enough jobs being created, not enough new businesses being started, not enough opportunities for graduates, for example, because other countries that have solved those issues and have a similar supply of university educated people are seeing better outcomes for those graduates.
What do you think the number one economic issue is from an outsider looking in at England or Britain and the UK more broadly? What's the one economic issue we need to be watching for? Is it, you know, is it industrial stuff? Is it service-based financial stuff? Is it the inflation piece? Is it immigration and jobs and that piece of it, which is very, very loud right now? What's the one thing we should be watching to see which way the wind's blowing on how the UK is going to be dealing economically here in the near future, especially with all this other scandal kind of sucking up all the bandwidth?
Well, I hate to sound like a broken record, but it is energy. I think energy is probably the most important issue, and I would say that because the decisions that the British government is making now are locking in a really awful energy system for decades to come. The government has decided to massively ramp up wind power, and wind power is unreliable. You know, you don't know when the wind is going to blow, and you also need to build far more turbines than you actually need capacity for, because you know when a 1 gigawatt wind farm is but it's only windy enough for it to operate at 50%. In order to supply 1 gigawatt of energy to the grid, you actually need 2 gigawatts worth of wind farms. So you're having to build out massive amounts of excess capacity, which is enormously expensive. You then, because wind, where it is windiest in the UK, is far away from the population centres that consume the most electricity, you have to massively upgrade the grid. So we're spending billions and billions and billions of pounds on this. In order to connect a gigawatt of wind energy to the grid, it costs about £1 billion, whereas to connect roughly the same amount of energy powered by nuclear costs 150 million. So it's a fraction of the cost. And we're also locking in subsidies. So we have these enormous subsidy measures where we're guaranteeing these wind farms that they will get a certain price for their electricity, which locks the price at a high level. And then also we have all of these renewables subsidies, which I mentioned before, and social policies to kind of subsidize energy for poorer households. But we put all of these onto bills themselves, which makes energy artificially expensive, whereas other countries pay for those things out of general taxation. So you don't have that kind of disincentive to use energy. And we also levy loads of carbon taxes on electricity, but not natural gas, which again disincentivizes people from moving from gas boilers, for example, to heat pumps, which use electricity simply because that electricity is so expensive. And I think this explains so much. It explains why there has been a kind of reduction in the rate at which living standards are growing, because people are spending so much money on energy and housing too. But it also explains why there's such a regional divide in Britain, because the high cost of energy has essentially killed British industry. Because it is just not sustainable to have any form of heavy industry when energy is so much more expensive than your competitor countries. And those industries were heavily concentrated outside of London, in the Midlands and the North and in Scotland. And it's those places that have seen, big regional disparities open up between there and London. Those are places that have not recovered from the financial crash. And I think that is really as a result of the really poor energy choices that Britain has made.
England is a nuclear power. What prevents it from getting a nuclear power grid?
Well, it's an interesting question. Partially, it's just down to the way we regulate it. We have this principle called ALARP, or as low as reasonably possible, which means that if you want to build a nuclear power station in the UK, you have to make it as safe as it's possible to make it, which sounds great, right? Nobody wants an unsafe nuclear power station. But if you wanted to be the safest you could possibly be, like, we would all go around in like bubble wrap, and we would never get in a car, and we would basically never go outside, because living your life, you're exposed to a certain amount of risk.
That would be a very English thing to do, to be fair. It'd be very stereotypical.
Well, yes, yeah, perhaps. The thing you have to remember is the people who are still in Britain are the ancestors of the people who didn't go off to colonize half the world. We're the people who like to stay at home. So yeah,
that felt like a dig. That felt like a dig. I ain't gonna lie.
Not at all. So nuclear power. You have this terrible regulation system. So you rather than as other countries do, saying this is an acceptable level of safety, you need to meet this level of safety. So say the level of background radiation in Cornwall, which is an area of southwest England, it has a higher level of background radiation because of the type of rocks that are there. There's no elevated risk of cancer if you live in Cornwall. So we could say, if you build a nuclear power station, there cannot be any more background radiation than there is naturally in Cornwall in the UK. That would be a reasonable level to put it. And instead of that, we say we just have to keep making them safer and safer and safer and safer, even if the risk actually isn't worth it. So like there's 2 nuclear power stations that are being built in the UK at the moment. They are set to produce the most expensive energy of any nuclear power plant in the world. They're facing massive cost overruns. But the biggest reason for this is that there's constantly this safety creep. So you have to build like massive concrete hulls around them, which, fine. These concrete hulls are designed to like absorb the impact of a jumbo jet. So if there's like a terrorist attack, but then ALARP says, well, you're still going to make some money from this. Therefore, actually, you need to build a second load of concrete around it so it can withstand 2 jumbo jets. And so you have this constant safety creep where they're adding more and more regulations. We had this issue where I think it was, I can't remember if it was Sizewell or Hinkley, but one of them, they had to add a load of new meshes to the reactor designs halfway through the process of building them, because somewhere else in the world there was a nuclear power station that had added these meshes, and therefore that kind of expands the scope of as low as reasonably possible. So we're constantly adding that. So rather than saying this is the safe level that you need to meet, we have this really discretionary system where the nuclear regulator isn't prepared to say exactly what safety means. They just add loads and loads of new things on, even if it doesn't actually increase or protect anybody from like cancer, for example. So that's a big part of the problem. And then there's also that it's just really difficult to build any kind of energy infrastructure in the UK. And I think the biggest part of this is that local people don't really see any of the benefits from it. Like if somebody builds a power station at the end of your road, like you're going to see a lot of negative consequences as a result of that. There's going to be increases in traffic and noise and all of that stuff. But you don't see any benefits from it, like you individually. What some other countries do where they have more devolution is they have for example, local taxation. So a local council can levy taxes on those energy facilities. So they actually have an incentive. You want an energy facility in your area because it means there's more money for local services that can be used. Or in some countries, you have systems where if you live near a proposed power plant, then you'll get a discount on your energy. So you kind of pay people off. I think we really need to look at the incentive structures, because there's lots of problems in the system where there are lots of routes for people to block energy and housing and to complain about them. But actually, there's only so much that you can do to change the rules to make it easier to build. Because eventually, if you just ignore local people, you're going to end up with those people voting in a government that reverses the rules that allow you to ignore them. So you have to create a kind of durable system. And I think the only way you do that is by incentivizing those people to want that energy or housing.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to get into an energy debate, but here's the thing. If you don't have a grid, you're not going to get the data centers, which are going to be the new, that is industry now. I mean, it just is. It's not a steel mill, but that's the new industry. You've got to have, if you're going to get data centers, computer centers, those things, any kind of electrical, anything with the computing system, you got to have heavy duty electrical grid. If you want to have electric cars, you have to have a heavy duty electrical grid for EVs and things like that. You were talking about wind power. The big thing with the wind power now is you have the massive container-sized batteries that go along with them to restrain that. You got to have a heavy-duty grid to transmit that stuff and to use it and to switch it over. All of that. So if you want to have this big, bright electrical future, you can have it, but there's trade-offs. And one of those trade-offs is you got to have a massive electrical grid with a massive amount of power. And I don't see anything other than nuclear or a whole lot of natural gas, because coal doesn't really give you enough of that. And oil is, very fungible. I think you got to go to nuclear to make it work. But anyway, all right, we've been picking on the UK. I'm going to give you a chance to take a couple shots at your wayward cousins across the sea here. I find it fascinating when I do overseas media and working with the Canadian national news folks. There seems to be this change with President Trump of the U.S. media overplays it because they're like, oh, we're losing all our registers. Like, no, they understand how our electoral system works. They know they got to kind of ride it out. But how much is, all right, we know this isn't optimum, we're just going to ride it out and see what the next president does, and how much of the relationship stuff and the damage is real with, and it's not even the policies, it's the back and forth, it's the transactional stuff, it's the stuff that doesn't make sense unless it's personally something that President Trump wants to do. That's the stuff that does damage. But give me a ratio from your point of view of the UK and what you hear talking to folks. How much of it is perception? How much of it is, well, we know Donald's a little off, we'll just wide him out? And how much of this is, no, we're going to recalibrate how we think of the US special relationship with the UK?
Well, I think there's an increasing consensus now that actually we can't just ride it out, because, one term of Trump, 2017 to 2021, that was an aberration. But actually at the point where you guys re-elected this man, at that point, it seems like we're kind of in for the long haul of America potentially electing kind of semi-autocratic leaders who don't really seem to care very much about the rest of the world. And I think there's a disparity between the attitudes that people have, or the voters have, which are, I think, increasingly anti-American. And I think it's not just the stuff like the tariffs, for example, which obviously are very unpopular, but it's also when Trump says stuff like, attacking our veterans who fought alongside Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think that was quite significant because. You had obviously Trump saying those comments, saying that NATO was never been there, never fought alongside the US, and kind of making disparaging remarks about us in relation to Iraq and Afghanistan. And if you think back to those wars, Britain stood side by side with America then, and the argument was, oh well, it's we kind of have to stand side by side with America. It's worth it in the long term because it's important to maintain that special relationship. Other European countries, France, Germany, for example, didn't go to war in Iraq. And actually, I don't think it's gained us anything. Like putting to one side whether the war was a good idea or a bad idea. I think most people would say it's a bad idea now. I don't think standing with America gained us anything in the long run compared to those other countries that didn't stand with America. And so I think there's an increasing consensus that actually America is going to do what America is going to do. And if we don't want to be vulnerable to the kind of whims of the American electorate, then we need to be more self-sufficient. Whether our politicians are willing to make the trade-offs and make the tough decisions required to, for example, increase defense spending so we're not reliant on America, because that's the one thing that Trump is right about, that Europe has been freeloading off America for its defense. But it's quite a cozy comfort blanket that European politicians can pull over themselves to kind of tell themselves that, oh, maybe America will elect a kind of liberal president again in 2028, and we won't have to worry about this. But no, they do have to take action on this, and also whether we will kind of get serious about growth, as we were talking about before, because it's really alarming that all of these big, exciting companies that are kind of powering the future of the global economy, they're all American. We don't have major players in artificial intelligence or big tech in general, and the reason for that is that we've regulated them out of existence. So getting serious about that. It's unclear whether we are going to, but it's also pushing Britain and Europe closer together. That's the other thing. So whether or not Europe gets serious about sort of getting its act together or not, I think our fate here in Britain will be firmly entwined with that of our European friends.
You just said something really important, and I want to drill down on it and ask you about it because I mean I piddle in European and UK affairs. I'm not an expert. I just airdrop in and I talk to people like you and others offline to try to keep up with it, but I'm not there all the time. You are. You just said it though. How much of it is the perception of President Trump or President Biden when he was in office, or President Obama, or pick whoever, George Bush, if you want to go back to the Iraq years? What's the distinction that the average person and maybe the political class separate from them, so you can answer for both of them? How much do they split off who the president is? And you just said it. Well, if the electorate's going to keep electing people like this, we view the country different. That is really the difference, right? Is there seems to be now, it's not just, oh, there's a president of America. Now it's, oh, the electorate of America wants this to happen. That feels like a culture and perception shift in the relationship to me. And I've felt that with the Canadian friends, because, and it's even more explicit because Trump's the 51st state and all that crap, which, I'm the American explainer when that happened. That was a fun gig, let me tell you. That feels like an important shift in the global fabric of what the Pax Americana post-World War II has been, doesn't it? That feels really significant to me.
Yeah, no, it does, and I think it's absolutely right. You go back to 2016, and we thought, oh well, it's kind of silly that America has elected this man, but
and you had Boris at the time, to be fair.
Yes, well, slightly later on, but yes, no, it's a fair point. But maybe they'll kind of see how bad he is, and then of course in 2020 kicked him out, and everything's fine again. But yeah, the decision to put him back, and of course in between time to have a man as president who couldn't string a sentence together, has really kind of, I think
fair.
I think it's we've always kind of thought of America as maybe a slightly brash place, but as a fundamentally serious country. And I think over the last 10 years, that reputation has eroded. And I think it's become increasingly clear to us that we are therefore reliant for our defense on an unserious country, and that is a completely unsustainable position.
I think there's a cultural shift too, and this gets us back to kind of where we started with Keir Starmer. Is it's really unusual. It's almost unusual for you to have prime ministers end on electoral terms. They almost always end up resigning one way or the other, getting forced out, or they'll manage the transition, however you want to say it. But one way or the other, you put a date on it. We never get rid of a president. And I think there's a disconnect in that too, because we just openly discussed it. Keir Starmer's done. It's just a matter of when. Well, electorally, Donald Trump came in elect. He's done, but we're sitting here going, no, we're doing this for another 2 years, 2.5 years. And it's a political difference and a cultural difference. But I think that's something I get from our friends in parliamentarianism is like, well, do you not think about the fact you're stuck with these people when you elect them? And you know what the honest answer is? No, we don't think about it that way, because it's just the circadian rhythm of our political system. Is no, we don't get rid of them, and we made it really, which it should be hard to get rid of somebody. I'm not saying that. I think that's something that is probably the UK friends and our Canadian friends to a little bit of a lesser extent, and the rest of the world, they just don't understand that piece of it. Whereas we kind of take that for granted that no, once we elect you, you're getting your 4 years. Maybe we should do something about that. That's another argument for another day, but that's like a mindset difference that just doesn't translate really well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And also you have, as we were kind of talking about at the start, you have a different dynamic where the leader in a parliamentary system is sat with their kind of colleagues in the legislature. You don't have that. You have that disconnect between the president and Congress. And I think that probably allows the president to behave in certain ways that wouldn't be acceptable here. I mean, you talk about Boris Johnson, for example, before, and yes, okay, he's also a joke leader, and there are some comparisons that you can make between him and Trump. But ultimately, he tried to cling to power when it was clear he didn't really have the legitimacy anymore. But it didn't work out for him. Like he was ousted. That type of kind of really corrupt behavior and telling the public that black is white, kind of trying to pull the wool over their eyes in that way just doesn't really work to the same extent in a parliamentary system, I don't think. And you just have you have that constant competition as well, because actually, yeah, as you say, Trump, he may be a lame duck, but he knows he's essentially safe in office until 2029. You don't have that in our system. Even if you win by a landslide, like Keir Starmer did a couple of years ago, there is always the possibility that one of your colleagues will be able to take over your job, and so you're constantly competing with them, essentially. And so, yeah, absolutely, you have a different dynamic there.
I remember doing media with some of your folks over there during the Boers stuff, and they were doing the Trump comparisons nonstop, and I'd always use this example. It's like, I don't think I'm ever going to hear Donald Trump, quote Homer in the original Greek. I don't think I'm going to have to worry about doing. So to be fair to Boris, he actually did pay attention in school, unlike maybe our president did not. So I will give him that much. Let me give him that. Let me hit a couple real quick things and we'll get you out of here. Appreciate your time today, but let's talk about who was helped and who was hurt by this current situation with the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. Let's start with the opposition. Kemi Badenoch, I thought she came off really well today. She turned it down. She hit her points and got out of the way. She realized when the fish is flopping on the dock, let it go and let everybody watch. I think she came off well here today.
Yeah, I would agree. I think she comes out of this crisis really well. I think she's consolidated her position as leader. You go back 6 months, there was a lot of talk that she was going to be ousted. There's no talk whatsoever of that now. She's done such a good job at the dispatch box, not just today, but over the last few months, that I think she's safe no matter what happens at the local elections next month, which incidentally, we've talked about Labour and those elections being disastrous for Labour. They're also going to be really bad for the Tories too. But I think things are looking up. I think there's a sense that she is a more serious figure and maybe is willing to confront those kind of trade-offs that we talked about before, and willing to kind of not just say what people want to hear. And I think people like that in a politician.
Yeah. The predominant story of the last few years before the Starmer kind of crash out spiral, whatever you want to call it, over the last 18 months, Reform Party, where are they at on this? Again, Even Farage has kind of been smart enough, like, just don't say too much about this, kind of let it go, although he can't help himself sometimes. But where's reform sitting now? Because it almost started to look a couple months ago like maybe they had peaked a little too early. Not that they're not going to win massively, but it seemed like it had kind of peaked off maybe a little bit. Where do you think they stand now today?
Well, they're down significantly in the polls. They were about 11 points ahead about 6 months ago. They're now only 5 points ahead and trending downwards. I think it's kind of baked in that they're going to do pretty well at these local elections. And of course, it's not all of the UK that is voting. It's only kind of different pockets of councils that are voting. But I think the thing that's harmed reform more is their kind of seen as associated with the sort of Trumpian politics, and Trump's behavior in office has harmed not just in Britain but also kind of across the Anglosphere, in Australia, in Canada, has harmed parties that are seen as associated with Trump's brand of politics. And if you talk to people here, I think there's a lot of voters who are really depressed. They feel that all the other parties have failed, and they're open to voting for reform, but then they look at what's happening in America and they really, really don't want that. And there was a focus group recently, and there was a woman who said that she was tempted to vote reform, but then she wasn't sure that she could live with herself for voting reform. She wasn't sure that if reform got into power and they started doing things like Trump was doing in the US, that she would be able to kind of reconcile that decision that she'd made. So I think people are feeling that they actually, they don't necessarily want the politics that reform is offering. They just don't want the politics of the other parties. And if and when another party, maybe it's going to be Kemi Badenoch, if and when another party is able to come forward and present something serious and credible, I think the reform bubble will possibly burst. But that is not going to be in the next few weeks.
No, it's not. Lib-Dems, are they still going to be mostly lost in the wash between the reform wave that's coming and the recalibration of whatever the Tories are going to be after this wipeout in the labor, and that's going to have a lot of shifting out? Are they just kind of stuck lost in the wash and getting some questions here and there, or do you see anything changing with them?
Yeah, they're pretty stagnant. They've not benefited from Labour losing popularity. They're not doing very well, not really making much noise, not creating much news. There's a lot of talk actually that Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, will be ousted soon. We will have to wait and see. But yeah, they're not going to do worse than they were doing previously. But they're not going to do much better either. They're kind of stagnating at about 12%.
Okay, something I follow just out of curiosity because I find it immensely amazing. But post-Sturgeon Scottish politics, after the Sturgeon scandal, and was that 2023 now? God, that seems like it was like last week. So 2023, that happened. The SNP basically ceased to exist as a functional political force for all practical purposes. Where's the Scottish piece of this now? Because it's gotten a little bit quieter, but it's also kind of gotten quieter because everybody got wiped out. So where are we at on that?
Yeah, well, the dynamic in Scotland is that Labour looked like they were probably going to win the most seats, if you looked at this kind of 18 months ago. But then the government in Westminster is now so unpopular that that the SNP has been able to kind of return to prominence. They've been in power for 20 years in Scotland, and it looks, there's a chance that they will win a majority of seats in the election. Of course, Scottish system is a proportional system, or semi-proportional, so it's not a first past the post system like in Westminster. So it's quite difficult to win a majority, but the SNP may well do so, and I think it's primarily off the back of kind of anti Westminster sentiment, and also the fact that the unionist vote still remains very split. We're seeing Reform actually doing quite well in Scotland, and they may well finish second. So whereas the kind of independence vote is all behind the SNP, the unionist vote is split between Labour, Conservatives, Reform, Lib-Dems. And so it's very hard for them to kind of confront the SNP in that way. Beforehand, the unionist vote was kind of rowing in behind Labour, and that's why it looked like Labour might be able to kind of take Holyrood in this election. But because Labour's so unpopular in Westminster, that split has occurred again.
All right, our Irish friends, always interesting to see what they're up to. Where are we at in the seemingly inevitable march from the 2.5 party system to a 3-party system? Is that where we're going with this? Or what do you think is going on with our Irish friends right now?
Well, I mean, I can't claim to be an expert in Irish politics. I kind of follow it with perhaps the same curiosity and interest that you follow British politics, but it's by no means my area of expertise. But it does seem to. I mean, it seems like they're pretty affected by the fuel shortages that are occurring as a result of the Middle East, and that is maybe the main dynamic in their politics at the moment, because they're so much more reliant on heating oil than we are in the UK or outside Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland is actually very reliant on it too, and they've been having lots of fuel protests, which seem to be driving populist sentiment there.
One of the great arcs of my lifetime is the change in Sinn Féin and Irish politics from when I was a kid to now. Really, someday we'll get some of our Irish friends and talk about that in the future. All right, buddy, when you're looking over here at us, what's broken through, even with all the noise and the mess with Starmer and everything else going on in the UK? I always enjoy asking you this question. What's a couple of the American headlines that have kind of poked through? I know obviously Iran is dominating just about everything internationally right now, but what does poke through y'all's media every now and then about what we got going on over here that you're keeping an eye on?
I mean, it's a somewhat boring answer, but it is just the Trump show at the moment. An interesting one. I know this was a few weeks ago, but the Melania Trump kind of coming out and saying that she had no kind of
Yes.
relations with Epstein was a kind of baffling one, because I don't think anyone beforehand was kind of saying that she had any kind of sort of connection to Epstein. But then by coming out and saying that she didn't, it drew loads of attention to it. That definitely had a lot of cut through, and it was a subject of curiosity here.
Yeah, it was obviously getting in front of something, and we know there's a couple of things getting ready to drop media wise about it. We know the entanglements. We've seen the photographs. Again, innocent until proven guilty, and a photograph isn't guilt. But if you're in those circles, you got to answer the questions. I think that's fair to say. Where are we at internationally on the Epstein stuff? Because Starmer's not going to survive this. Mandelson's probably going to prison one way or the other here for something somewhere in here, whether it's the Epstein stuff or the foreign influence or whatever. Why do you think, if you want to throw the Andrew piece in there, why do you think the UK seems to be doing a little bit more proactive stuff on the Epstein stuff than America? And I don't want to get into conspiracy theories, because I understand it's a lot of powerful people with a lot of dirty hands. Everybody understands that. Nobody's disputing that. But still, UK seems to be moving a little. They're at least doing something about it where the US has not. What's your working theory on that?
I mean, I think perhaps the difference in the UK is that our institutions are more independent of politics. You don't have a head of the FBI, for example, that's chosen by the president, or judges that are chosen by politicians, or kind of district attorneys that are voted in. You have a much more independent system, so there's more, I think, accountability for politicians. They can't necessarily brush this stuff under the carpet in the same way that I think is kind of what's happening in America. Also, there's probably less of an incentive, given what we know about Trump's potential connections to Epstein. There's probably less of an incentive from the top to kind of sort this out than there is here, because although Starmer's very affected by it, actually you do have those other very senior people around Starmer who potentially stand to benefit from Starmer's demise.
One more thing, and I didn't even want to ask this question, but too many people asked me to ask you the question, so I have to ask you this question. I didn't want to do it, but I know this, but there was the report that came out, and I think the data is a little funky on this, but let's just assume it's at face value. And it went viral that if they made the UK a US state, it would be the 51st state economically. Now, I think that's a little bit of funny math on a couple of levels, but let's just run with that for a second. What do you say to something like that? I know we were joking about West Virginia, but hey, West Virginia's getting a Google hyper data center, so we're moving up in the world. Where do you see the UK's place in the world? Because I know you enough, we've talked enough, we've been friends long enough. I know you don't have the pie in the sky, we're going to return the empire kind of nonsense, but the UK is really important. It's really important to the EU. It's really important to the world. It's really important to America. You're an important ally to us. What do you think the healthy point of view of where the UK places is in the world right now, even with all your domestic problems? What do you think the healthy spot to look and say, this is our place in the world as it stands right now, year of our Lord 2026?
I think our place in the world should be as an ally of Europe, an ally of Kanzuk, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and a kind of leading middle power. I think we have the real potential to take on the mantle of all of these new technologies, because we have a brilliant scientific base. We still do have excellent universities. We speak English, which is obviously a benefit too. So I think if we can regulate things smartly, and not kind of regulate these frontier technologies like artificial intelligence out of existence in the way that the EU has done, we potentially stand to gain from what's happening in America. If I was the British government right now, I would be crawling over broken glass to try and convince Anthropic to be putting as much investment into the UK as possible, and trying to create a home for that sort of somewhat more ethical artificial intelligence. I think, Britain is never going to be the world's leading power again, but we can have a lot more power and influence than we do now, and we can grow our economy much more quickly than we are doing now. I think becoming a home for frontier technologies. I think that should be our place in the world.
Yeah, and again, you got enough of the world's financial markets running through you. There's no reason some of that money shouldn't be staying there for those kind of things, because the money's going through there. It's just a matter of siphoning it off a little bit. All right, last question. What do we do with the special relationship with America? I know it's going to be very dependent on the leadership, especially the American side of it. But I think rank and file, just folks in the UK and folks in America, they understand it's important. They understand the history. We all like each other. We can have our rivalries on certain things, but I think it's ingrained in most of us, especially our generation, yours and mine, even though I'm older than you. I think people understand it's important and it's worth working at and it's worth preserving. What do you think we do besides just the obvious of the leadership? What do you think we need to do to work on this thing?
I think it has to be Britain improving its defense posture, taking more responsibility for its own security, because then we can approach the special relationship from a position of strength. At the moment, the reason why we're so vulnerable to Trump's decisions is because we're not able to defend ourselves. If we were able to defend ourselves, we could say, well, okay, you've elected someone who's mental, and you can live with the consequences of that for 4 years. But actually, we'll be here when you elect somebody sensible again, and we can kind of pick up where we left off. But we can't do that because we're so vulnerable to the decisions that mental person might make in the meantime. So I think it really has to be kind of more sovereign capability, attracting the kind of large tech investment that will mean we're, again, not 100% reliant on American tech firms. I think it's reducing our reliance so that we can have a more equal friendship, as you might put it.
Did the inability to send the Royal Navy in any way, shape, or form to the Iran thing, even if you wanted to, setting that piece of it aside, did that hurt as bad as it seemed like it hurt certain people I talked to? Is like, yeah, this is embarrassing. We don't like this very much.
Yeah, I mean, of course it was humiliating, but I don't think it came as a surprise to anybody who's been following British defense policy
Both
over
are
the
true.
last 20 years. So, yeah.
Was this just kind of where it's like, okay, now everybody can see it and we got to eat it? Because that's kind of how it felt.
Yeah. I mean, it's humiliating. I think also that our politicians aren't really taking it seriously enough. We have a strategic defense review, which is supposed to be coming forward. Has been supposed to be coming forward for months and months and months and months and months, still hasn't been published, despite this crisis in the Middle East. There's arguments between the Treasury and Number 10 and the Ministry of Defense about who's going to pay for the upgrades that we need to make to our military. Decisions just need to be made. Again, it comes back to trade-offs. Somebody needs to grasp the nettle and sort this out and be willing to make the trade-offs and say, actually, well, maybe we can't spend as much on other things, welfare, for example, because we do need to spend more on defense.
Yeah. And I know it was a couple of years ago now, nobody cares, but yeah, the president's comments about the UK vets was offensive to me as somebody who was in Iraq and Afghanistan with UK troops. I flew home from Iraq on an Aussie 130 because they held the plane on the runway because I had a situation where I had to leave and they're like, oh, it's him. We'll hold the plane. Go get him. We'll get him out. I flew home on an Aussie, or flew to Kuwait on an Aussie 130. So I took offense to that. I think we need to continue to be comrades in arms because the U.S. and the U.K. has a pretty good record of doing what needs to be done in combat arms, and I think that tradition needs to continue. And I hope you get leadership that'll get you back on equal man for man. It's very equal footing. This is strategic and the logistics and building it back up. There's nothing wrong with the British service member, I promise you, I've served with them. They're excellent. They're exceptional. So let's get back to that. Let's keep being friends. I don't want to lose you as a friend over politics because we like our British friends, my friend. Let folks know where they can keep up with you. In the meantime, we're definitely going to have you back because the UK isn't. Look, we got to pick on you because we got a hot mess coming ourselves, so we can have some fun with it. Let folks know and then keep up with you until we get you back on, my friend.
Well, here on Substack at Build Vector. That is my Substack where I post sporadically about British and global political affairs, and also on X at Jack_nostalgic. It has been a pleasure.
I didn't even hit you with too much housing, which we usually talk a whole lot about, but it's kind of hard to when you got government scandals and such, but we'll get into that next time. Jack, I appreciate you, my friend. Good insight, good conversation. Greatly appreciate it. We'll talk again soon, buddy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Yeah, appreciate you. All right. That's it for us. Let us know in the comments. Make sure you hit up all the podcast stuff. Make sure you hit up the YouTube on Substack. It's free to subscribe. You get everything. If you want to give us money, we will take it. Just hit the button. It's a couple clicks for that. We appreciate you giving us the greatest thing you have, your time. Subscribe, share. More importantly, give us comments. Let us know what you think. We love your feedback and we appreciate it. So until we talk to you again, I hope you're well. I hope you're well fed, and we'll talk to you again real soon for the next Heard Tell. I'm learning where the button is. I'm going to learn this thing. We're all in this together. Take care.